How y'all doing? We are working again on this 2004 Subaru Outback. And again, all these consecutive videos about this transmission job I'm doing are applicable to essentially any of the all-wheel drive 1990s and 2010s up to 2010 Subaru Outback, Legacy, Forester, very similar, if not near identical, to the Impreza as well. I will note that most of this will not apply to the BRZ or the FRS. Again, needs to be all-wheel drive for these mostly to apply. So what we have out so far is the exhaust. As you can see, the exhaust is gone. The drive shaft is out. The heat shield is gone. Around back here, you can see the rear differential. And so what we are working on now is removing the transmission support frame member. I don't remember its exact name, but it is the main frame component to the bottom side of the transmission that also acts as one of the engine mounts. And so we are going to start with the front of it. There is this crossbar right here, and that is supported by two bolts on the outside. There is one there and one on the other side right there. Those are both 14 millimeter, 17 millimeter, I am mistaken. Those are both 17 millimeter bolts. And then in the center of that crossbar is going to be your two little studs that have nuts in them, both 14 millimeter. Easiest to get at those with a deep well socket. And so I would suggest taking out the two nuts first and then undoing the two 17s on the side, and then that whole bracket will come down. And then we will remove the under bracket that actually has the bushing mounts. You ask yourself, well, why would I need to do something like this? Well, if you've got a lot of vibrations coming from your engine and or your transmission, you might be able to feel them in your shifter or on the floor underneath the driver's feet or in the cab at the general front area. This is one of the engine mounts that you might start with replacing to take some of those vibrations and actually not transmit them through the cab as much. As you can see, you've got one of your bushings right there. There's another one there. There's another one sandwiched between that crossbar and the actual bracket. As well, we've got one up in here. So if you're replacing those bushings, once you get this bracket out, you'll have to disassemble it to get to all those bushings and replace them. What they look like is this. Those little in-between ones. And then this guy with those is a bar that goes all the way across. You take them out, these two nuts. And the bracket will already be out, so we'll take those other bolts out. But as well, this is what you would need to do if you're coming to the back of the transmission and trying to pull off the end of it to replace the center differential for torque bind. I'm not really going to cover torque bind right now, but if you already know what it is and you're like, yes, I've got torque bind, everything up to this video is something you have to do to get the back of the transmission out and get a new center differential in, which, as a note, retails from Subaru Direct for about $500 to $600 for these cars. So, moving on, you've taken out this bracket now. What you would do next is come at the four 14 millimeter bolts, one there, one here, and then same thing on the other side. I can get a closer view at those. Mine are already out, but you can see the bolt hole there and the bolt hole on the other side, right there. Right up in there. And it'll be identical on the other side. So you'll take those out. They look like this. Got a little lock washer on them. This may be a good time to replace those lock washers. If your lock washer has gotten flat, like there's no distance between the top and the bottom anymore, they need to be replaced. Something you definitely don't want to have come loose from vibrations. After you get those four out, you'll come to the four bolts back here that are as well 14 millimeter, so two on this side and two on this side. You'll take those out, and when you get down to the last one, you're going to want to keep a hand on the bracket itself and loosen that down, bracket will come down. And so I'm going to do that real quick. So we got those brackets out. One thing to note, a way I'm keeping track of where all these bolts and nuts go is I'm just putting them back in their places after I take them out so I don't lose them or forget where they go. So next we need to disconnect the shift bushing and shift linkage. This applies only to the manual. I'm not entirely sure how this applies to the automatic. I do believe there is a cable connection that comes down here where the shifter is, runs up into the transmission. Might need to find another video to do that. But for the manuals, you've got your shift bushing right here. And so this is mounted onto this guy right here. As I see, put the nut back on there. This used to just be slid on there with a little bushing plate on the other side. And so it's just a 12 millimeter, I believe. Yeah, 12 millimeter. Broke it loose with a wrench, took the nut off, and then had to use a small hammer to beat this off, slide it off, put my nut back on so I don't lose it. And then up here is your shift linkage. That is connected to this through a roll pin. And so this guy used to be rotated up into there. And it had this pass-through bolt through it with a nut on the other side, both 12 millimeter. You do need to hold the nut to undo the bolt, otherwise it'll free spin. This was kind of a hard thing to get out because it was very stiff inside of the bushing, inside that roll pin connection. So I ended up just taking a wrench and sliding it around the collar of the bolt and kind of just prying it out a little bit at a time, shake it, pry it, shake it, pry it. It helped at some points to just kind of back it out, use a socket and twist it so threads weren't getting caught on anything. Eventually it came out and shift linkage is disconnected. This could be a good time to replace that bushing inside the roll pin connection as well, because that is one of the ways you keep your shifter tight to the connections in the transmission. If you get slop in your shifter, there is a bushing down here and a bushing back here, and then there's that bushing in the roll pin connection. When those start to wear out, you start to get slop inside of the shifter itself, and it can cause misalignment inside of the transmission when you're shifting and cause gear wear. So those are things to keep in mind. So that basically gets us to the back of the transmission. If you were continuing on to do a torque bind work, you would go through and you'd remove all the bolts around the back of the housing here, and then literally this guy just slides out. And you'll have to find another video for doing that, because that is not what I'm doing at this time. But just as a note, that'll all slide out. The differential will come with the back of the transmission off of its shaft, and there is a geared shaft that will also come out with it. And you need to take very careful care to look at how they are connected inside there before you start taking it out and putting the new one in. Make sure you use copious amounts of assembly lube when you put that guy back in. As well, be aware that a lot of transmission fluid is going to come out with that. So that's it for what we're doing right now. Join me next time if you're continuing down this rail to remove the front axles to get the transmission out. Thanks for watching. Just, like, subscribe, leave me a comment. Let me know if there's something I missed that you want to see. At some point, I may do a reverse install video, but that'll be when the transmission's done getting worked on. Thanks for watching.